Congressman Paul Ryan with his wife Jana, his daughter Liza, and his boys Charlie and Sam, his mom Betty. Clearly emotional at the start of this when he talked about his dad who died at 16, when he talked about his mom Betty, at one point wiping away a tear. But then about mid-speech it seemed that he got his stride. Talked about the president's health care law, a big applause winner. 60 times interrupted for applause throughout this speech. He talked about fighting on Medicare, and it was a battle that Romney and Ryan want to have. One of the biggest lines of applause, this one. College graduates should not have to live out their 20s in their childhood bedrooms staring up at fading Obama posters and wondering when they can move out and go on and get their life going. He also made fun of Mitt Romney at one point about the songs on his iPod, saying
also
that
available.
They were elevator music.
In the elevator from time to time, saying his own iPod began with AC/DC and ended with Led Zeppelin. It was a moment, you know, where he tried to sort of humanize, that's what people have been saying, but he tried to bring some color to Mitt Romney and acknowledge their age difference and talk about how they have some differences. They have a lot in common. Another big applause line of the evening saying, ladies and gentlemen, these past 4 years we've suffered no shortage of words in the White House. What's missing is leadership in the White House, and talking about how, in his view, they forever have been shifting blame and it's time for them to take responsibility, focusing on freedom, and talking about how do you really want to live in a country where everything is free but us.
The hall was energized throughout this speech, and before that, we heard from former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who, by the way, did that speech, we confirmed, without a teleprompter.
Pretty impressive.
She did that off her notes. It did match a previous fundraiser she did in Utah, but it was a little different, and she clearly fired up this crowd as well.
That moment at the end of her speech where she said, she talked about a little girl who grows up in Jim Crow Birmingham, and her parents who can't take her to a movie theater or a restaurant but make her believe that even though she can't have a hamburger at Woolworths, she can be president, and she becomes the Secretary of State, was a moment in this auditorium as everybody rose to their feet, and you know, our viewers at home surely remember it.
And a rising star, New Mexico Governor Martinez really got this crowd going. The first Hispanic woman, female governor in the country. Let's check in with our panel now. Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer, former senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to George W. Bush, Karl Rove, and Fox News senior political analyst Britt Hume. Brett, Paul Ryan, your thoughts?
Well, you know, it was thought that the first night of the convention was to be the night where Obama had his skin ripped off and the case against him was made, and that night had been lost. Well, Ryan did that tonight, and the tricky thing he faced was, could he deliver an eloquent speech and a powerful speech in which he came across as a likable and trustworthy young man that the American people can have confidence in, and still deliver a devastating indictment of President Obama's administration. My sense about it, just listening to it and kind of guessing how people out there might react to it, is that he probably did that job pretty well in the eyes of a great many people out across this country. This speech was interesting, it was compelling, it had humor, and the moment when he mentioned his mother and his pride in her and her being his role model, and you get that amazing picture of the little granddaughter snuggling up to her, that was worth a lot too, in terms of the sense that this is a nice young man who delivered nonetheless a lethal shot tonight.
And of a little girl who appeared to be friends with one of Paul Ryan's daughters, who apparently found herself caught in the shot and made a run for it, which was a funny moment. Carl, today the Obama campaign put out an ad in anticipation of Paul Ryan's remarks here, calling him, among other things, out of step, extreme, says he wants to end Medicare as we know it, and then describing him as fiercely and harshly anti-female. Do you think the audience at home walked away with any of those impressions?
No, and look, the Washington Post had an interesting poll today conducted with Pew, in which they asked people to describe their initial impressions of Paul Ryan over the last 2 weeks, and they said the top 9 words used to describe Paul Ryan, 6 of them were favorable, and 3 of them were just sort of factual, and none of them were negative. And I think Britt was right. Tonight, he made a pointed, direct, sober, but respectful critique of Obama, not delivered in anger and malice, but instead with disappointment and regret, and did it expertly. There were 2 other notes he hit that I want to briefly mention. One is, conservative populism. This was an attack on big government and upon the cronyism and the corruption of the current administration. And then there was a big note of optimism and energetically delivered. It was also in Condi Rice's speech. Her biggest applause lines were not on foreign affairs. They were on American exceptionalism and the values that undergird that. And I thought it was an interesting comment.
And Charles, before I get to you, I should point out you did not get the memo about the blue checked shirt by your other panelists, but go ahead.
Aren't they adorable?
I thought the speech by Ryan was bold, very strong, and very large, in the sense that he went way beyond just the attacks, which have been extremely effective, like stiletto attacks. Each one a short jab that left a mark. There was no long elaboration, no wind-up. He went point by point. And I agree with Carl. It was sort of more in sorrow than in anger. But it cleverly reminded people. You know that line about the young people with a faded poster of Obama on the wall who don't have a job? It reminded people of the fact that Obama had disappointed them. He had so much promise. And he started with that premise. And in the end, he said, what have they left you with in real life? I thought one of the themes that ran through his speech, Condoleezza Rice and Susana Martinez, was Obama is conducting a war on success. Condi Rice spoke about, we're not jealous of success. Martinez spoke about the success of her parents. They built that. And then Ryan, I thought, was stem-lining and talking about how everything the administration has done has been to denigrate what is so natural to Americans, to appreciate success, to celebrate it, and to say Romney is a success. That's a good thing. I think it's very powerful.
Panel, we'll be back with you in just 1 minute. We want to get now to Chris Wallace, who's at the podium position near the convention floor in the middle of it all. Chris?
Well, Megan, you know, a lot of people think that Paul Ryan has for some time been the intellectual leader of the Republican Party, and I think you could see that tonight. This was really a tour de force by a very brilliant and very thoughtful man. I want to add to what Britt said. This was as cogent, as coherent, as searing an indictment of the Obama record as you have heard from the critics. Obviously, his supporters are going to disagree, but it was an indictment with a bill of particulars. The stimulus. He said this came as an effort supposedly to try to jumpstart the economy. It ended up being corruption and cronyism and corporate welfare. Obamacare, the missed opportunity when the job one should have been to resuscitate this economy, and instead we got into an effort by central planners to control 1/6 of the economy. And then Medicare, which I think he really stood on its head. Of course, a lot of people knew Paul Ryan as the man in those ads who supposedly pushed Granny in a wheelchair up a hill and then off a cliff. He said, no, the real threat to Medicare comes from the Obamacare and the fact that they're raiding $716 billion from Medicare to pay for Obamacare. Now, what is the Romney-Ryan team going to do instead? Nothing especially new. He talked obviously about regulatory reform, about tax reform, about cutting spending. But it was a sharp and dramatic contrast to the broken promises. One of the most powerful parts was when he started talking about the end of the Obama presidency as if it were over, as if it was in the past tense. I just want to make two final points because they're going to be brought up over the course of the next 24 hours. He talked about the GM plant in Janesville that was shut down after Obama came in. I'm sure the Democrats are going to point out it was the president who bailed out GM. And he also criticized the president for doing nothing about the Bowles-Simpson plan. He was a member of the Bowles-Simpson Commission, and he voted against it. Back to you, Megan.
Chris Wallace, thank you.
So how did Congressman Ryan do tonight? Fox News senior political analyst Britt Hume joins us. So how did he do, Britt?
I thought he did fine. I thought he had a difficult task. You know, the convention lost its first day. That was going to be the day when the Obama record was laid bare and attacked. He took care of that tonight, and he did it in a way that I thought was specific. It was point by point. It was tough, but it wasn't mean. I don't think he came across as a mean guy. I don't think he seems like a mean person, so that helps a lot. But so I think it was very effective. There was humor in it. There was a wonderful moment. I'm sure you noticed it, Greta, that it was kind of one of those fortunate things that happen. Sometimes the camera's in the right place for the thing that happens. And when he said his mother was his role model, and they showed the picture of the mother, and the little granddaughter was snuggled up to her, that was one of those things where, you know, people look at that at home. That's dynamite.
I know it is. You know, he seems earnest in his delivery. I mean,
well, he
I mean,
yeah,
Our political panel, Washington Examiner chief political correspondent Byron York and ABC News senior Washington editor Rick Klein. Rick, first to you tonight, Congressman Paul Ryan.
Energy, enthusiasm, excitement. I think there was a good story that was told there. He tied the Romney campaign message in with his own personal story, I think, in a really effective way. A lot of zingers against Obama, and I think also a very effective description of why Mitt Romney is the right person to do. I think he talked about Mitt Romney more in that speech than just about everyone else other than Ann Romney combined.
You know, I was not a big fan of Chris Christie last night. I think tonight was as big a success for Paul Ryan as last night was not a good night for Chris Christie. He had to do a number of things. He did have to deliver a real indictment against the Obama administration. He had some really good barbs directed straight at the president for talking too much. That was incredibly well received in the hall. Had to introduce himself a little bit, did that, had some people tearing up, talking about his mother, and most of all, he had to talk and he had to convince people that he and Mitt Romney were going to spend all of their time working on jobs, the economy, and debt. He was really, really well focused on that.
And there were two images I thought that were effective in describing his appeal. This AC/DC to Zeppelin idea in his iPod, just talking about what his generation represents, and then the fading picture of Obama on the walls of these kids coming home from college without a job. It's an easily understandable image that I think if you can make that generational appeal, that's how you do it.
You know, one of the speechwriters for this speech was the guy who wrote Sarah Palin's speech at the Republican convention in 2008 in Minneapolis, which was a beautifully done speech, and this was the same way. And I think the image of the bedroom was just huge, and people are going to remember that. The AC/DC to Zeppelin thing was really fascinating because he used it as an example of showing that he had much younger musical taste than Mitt Romney. Led Zeppelin was 40 years ago. And so actually I was talking with James Rosen about this a few minutes ago, and he said, you know, the real point is to get to white, middle-aged, disaffected voters who may have voted for Barack Obama last time around and make that connection with them this time around.
What about Governor Romney tomorrow night?